Today I wanted to go down a little bit further down that Christing rabbit hole and let's get a little bit into that from the watcher's perspective. Now, the idea of Christing, again, is not very familiar in the Christian tradition, and the reason for that is because it's been largely suppressed. Like, you do get forms of it that are still there in Christianity, but it's not obvious, right? So I suppose part of this idea of the channel is to make things that are kind of veiled, to bring them out into the light so that people can make determinations that they need to make to improve their own lives and spiritual journeys and so on. So anyway, going back to the Christing, what is that all about? Well, again, I'm not going to get into specifics as far as the Western Tantric variant of that. I'll let the likes of Dr. Amon Hillman kind of get into those details, but it was understood and universally understood, I would argue, that the use of substances as well as or sacraments as well as consort practice was available. Now, I've engaged in both consort practice as well as sacramental practice. I can tell you that is not a requirement, but it can be helpful. It's what the Buddhists call skillful means. So, yes, you could be sure that Jesus was engaged in one form or another of either consort practice or sacramental practice. And the whole idea was to incite the Christing to begin in the pineal gland. That was the whole purpose of it. It can be argued that this was understood by the Jewish people and the Christians that came out of that since at least the Bronze Age, and that this idea of Christing, using either consort practice or substances in order to get into a prophetic mindset is something that goes way back and is universal. So, but again, the purpose of these substances and the purpose of this consort practice, of whatever variety was practiced back then, is to reach that internal Christing, the ejaculation rather than the ejaculation. So the idea is, rather than the energy to flow out, that it go upward and reverse and go upward, which in Sanskrit is called ulvaretas, which is to bring that energy upward and to incite the pineal gland to open up and begin to produce this substance, this ambrosia. So we're talking about internal alchemy, and I can make the argument that we are designed this way precisely to be able to reach this point. So it's not a coincidence that the pineal gland was considered since ancient times the seat of the soul. There's a reason for that. You can call this pineal gland a sort of portal to be able to access directly that information from the watcher's hive mind. I argue that that is precisely the whole purpose and point of engaging in these practices, is to lighten up, so to speak, the energy body. And the main circuit in the energy body is this one here that goes over the spinal column along the twin energies, basically the mercurial caduceus, right? So, I mean, these things were understood by the ancients in the West as well. But again, all these teachings were suppressed. At some point, uh, Christianity became the official religion of the empire, and all versions of Christianity that were not deemed fit uh, were eradicated. Uh, and so these things went underground. It wasn't until 1,000 years later, during the Renaissance, that we began to see a rediscovery of these things. And so you also saw a resurgence of alchemy. You saw a resurgence of ritual magic and things of that nature. But I argue that we have not come full cycle as far as the rediscovery of these ancient traditions, because there's been a lot of interests that have obscured these teachings. And so I would imagine that this is why, in part, the Watchers have urged me to come forth and to bring these things forth and simplify these things and to put them in plain English and plain language, in order that these things get out, because it's time. It's time for these things to get out. We're going through the pangs of a civilization that is struggling to reach type 1 status, but there are things that need to be addressed in order for that to be achieved. And I would argue that this is one of those. So this is my way of putting the key in the lock, so to speak, and trying to bring these out in a very simplified form, in order that we can facilitate the emergence of a type 1 civilization. So again, going back to the Christing and going back to, this is something that was well understood in ancient times. This is something that was well understood among the early Christians. And I argue that this is a variant of Tantra, a Western variant of Tantra that was largely suppressed by certain authorities, particularly church authorities, and that it has to come out again. It has to come out, and it has to reach as many people as possible in order for things to change, and change on a fundamental level, so that we can reach type 1 civilization status. So again, the sacraments and the consort practice in that tantric variant were optional, as much as they may have been in the East, or are in the East, I would argue. But they're there, they're present, they're a possibility, they're a means to an end. So, and again, the end is to light all this up like a Christmas tree, basically, and to bring this Holy of Holies into fully online, to be able to access this information from the hive mind of the Watchers. I mean, that's the whole point of this all. And yeah, so as we continue down this rabbit hole, I've challenged the Watchers, because they say that they, unlike something that I love, like yoga, they say they are inexhaustible, and I say, are you really? We'll see about that, right? Because I've started this channel a few years ago with yoga, and yoga is about the most interesting and deepest tradition that I know of. So they're saying that they're infinitely interesting and far more complex and deep than anything, including yoga. that yoga is just a product of them, an offshoot rather than the root. And I say, okay, you're on. We'll see how much I can go along with this and how deep down the rabbit hole I can go with them and with you in this new version or iteration of the channel. So as we continue, time after time, we'll go down this rabbit hole further and further and see if there's an end to it. But for now, we'll just leave it there.